Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Quarterdeck with Miguel the Gunny Signs. This week on The Quarterdeck, in our reading of our book, With the 1st Marine Division in 2003 in Iraq, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we're going to take a look at the operational planning and an update that the division wasn't actually prepared to get. But this included the envelopment of Baghdad and the outer cordon in their mission to execute it, to ensure that they moved into Baghdad, and now instead of going through it, they have another mission. And we'll take a look at that this week to get us up to speed on what is going on. In our hero highlights, we will take a look at Captain Richard Eugene Fleming, a pilot of the United States Marine Corps Reserve, and find out a little bit more on his story. What did he do to earn himself the Congressional Medal of Honor?
Drop and give me 25. I'm the gunny.
It's time for the gunny.
The Quarterdeck. Lights. Get online right now. You got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, my bunch of knuckle-dragging, beer-drinking, hard-charging devil dogs. You're listening to The Quarterdeck. I am your host, Miguel the Gunny Signs.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
The Quarterdeck. March 30th and the end of March, man, my goodness, it has snuck up on me. On us, should I say. Where the heck is the time going? It's almost like last year again. Good gosh, every year is flying by. This month is gone. We're moving on into April now. And, it's hard to believe exactly where all this time is going. Not only that, but this week, the 25th of March, was a day that is embedded into my mind, and I am never going to forget it. The reason being is because it was during the initial time that we had crossed from Kuwait into Iraq during the initial invasion, liberation, if you will, of the Iraqi people from the regime of Saddam Hussein. And the reason that that day sticks to my mind is because I can remember it was one of the Marines' birthday. Actually, it was two of the Marines' birthdays that day. But the reason it sticks not only in my mind, but in everybody's mind that was actually there during that time is because we had a massive, and when I say massive, I mean a massive sandstorm while we were moving from Kuwait heading towards Baghdad. Now, what I want you guys to picture is this. Those of you that may be living in a desert area or where you get monsoons and stuff like that, it's kind of like that. But this was something that none of us had really experienced before. The ground out there in Iraq, it's like an orangey color. Picture yourself an area that is covered pretty much with clay. It looks like almost like that orangey brown color of clay. That's what it was like. It was hard at some points, but it was kind of soft in others. Now, on this particular day, it started to get a little bit of windy. So you can hear the wind blowing. And then, all of a sudden, we see a big giant cloud coming towards us. Those of you that have seen the movie The Mummy, you guys can picture this. Seeing that humongous cloud of dirt coming towards you. And before we knew it, it was completely on top of us. But to top it off, it wasn't just the wind that was blowing. Now we had to deal with all that dirt, all that dust. We used what we had. We had bandanas that we could put around our mouth and our nose to keep that dirt from, us breathing it in. We had our goggles that we were all issued when we deployed as part of the gear that we needed to have to ensure that we were prepared to still be able to see in the event that we had some kind of sandstorms and stuff like that. But this was something biblical. That's the best way that I can look at it. It was freaking biblical. Now, because of this, it made it very, very difficult for us to actually see and to operate. So we were basically kind of stuck in that area where we were at that point. Now, if you guys can remember, my job in the Marine Corps was artillery, an artillery cannoneer. We were responsible for shooting artillery fire in support of the ground troops that were on the ground in front of us to ensure that they had all the support that they needed in the event that they needed something, to ensure that they were able to suppress the enemy before they actually moved forward and continued on with their mission. Now, in order for us to actually shoot, we have to have a reference point of some kind to actually get the howitzer laid or set up or placed into the actual position. We used a collimator that was placed behind the howitzer or in front, wherever you needed to place it, but most of the time we never placed it in front because of the concussion of the howitzer. When you fired it, it would just simply knock it over. We also had a DAP. That was a point that we referenced in maybe a mountainside, a valley, something else that was far away, that we could actually use to actually have our sights pointed at and let us orient in the direction that we had to. But we also had aiming posts behind us. Now, what an aiming post is imagine a candy cane, the red and white. And these are just kind of like metal poles that we stick in the ground, and there's two of them that we put together behind the howitzer to allow us to be able to align them together. One was a certain distance away, and the other one was a further away. And we were able to actually align them to be able to actually fire the howitzer. Now, back to the sandstorm. Now, imagine all this wind blowing, all this dust blowing, and everything. The collimator wasn't staying up. The wind was knocking it over, so that was out of the picture. Our distant aiming point, that DAP that I talked about, was completely invisible. Could not see it. That left our aiming post. Now, for some reason, and I cannot understand why, even though the dirt was blowing so hard and we couldn't really see anything maybe 2 feet in front of us, our aiming posts were still visible. We were still able to see those aiming posts that allowed us to ensure that we were still able to support those troops that were on the ground. And I don't know why we were still able to see those, but that allowed us to continue to be able to support our infantrymen that were in front of us. Whether it was something that was maybe with us, I am a religious person, I believe in things like that, a higher being that allows us to continue to see those aiming posts to allow us to continue to do our mission. To this day, I really can't explain it, but here we have the wind blowing, the dust blowing everywhere. And then to top it off, all of a sudden, it started to rain. So now, not only was the dirt blowing, and as everybody knows, when rain comes down on dirt and stuff, it kind of helps it settle down a little bit so it's not blowing around a lot of places. But that wasn't the case on this particular day because it was just raining and it turned into red clay mud on the ground, and we still had all this dirt and dust blowing everywhere. So now it was completely sticking to us. So we had a bunch of dirt, clay looking things stuck on everybody. And here we are shooting the howitzers, running around doing our fire missions and stuff like that, looking like a bunch of Oompa Loompas, a bunch of red, orange Oompa Loompas running around. And, we were wearing our mop suits, our gas suits that we had to wear because we crossed into Iraq and we were under the impression that we might get attacked by gas chemical weapons. And we needed to be prepared in the event that something like that occurred. So we had to have our gas suits on with our gas mask there on our side ready to go. And if you guys can imagine, these gas suits, now they're carbon lined inside. So they have a layer of carbon inside of them to help protect our bodies or anything like that from getting any kind of chemical agents that may come in contact with our skin. There's a top and a bottom pair of pants that have suspenders to help keep them up on your body, as well as rubber boots that you have to wear over your regular boots. Now, I don't have to tell you guys, it was hot during that time. The weather is up there in the hundreds. And here we are having to wear all this gear to allow us to make sure that we stayed safe in the event that we were attacked by any kind of chemical weapons or anything like that. But I got to tell you, it was freaking hot. Now, our command had made a decision that allowed us to ensure that we had this gear on, but they allowed us to be in PT gear. Our green shorts, our green skivvy shirt underneath that gear, and that was it, in our boots. So it allowed us to stay a little bit cooler than we would have been if we had to wear our actual utility uniform underneath that. And then we were going to be freaking hot. So it made it a little bit better. But this storm lasted for about 3 days. 3 days, this weather was freaking nasty and disgusting. It was wet, a little bit colder at night, so we were cold. And that just made it even worse. Because now the ground was wet, it was soft, it was muddy. So whenever we shot our howitzers, they dug in. They have what they call self-digging spades on the back, and it's pretty much just like a big giant shovel-looking thing that digs into the ground further once the howitzer is fired. It digs in to allow it to get into place, and it's not going to move that much anymore at all. Now in Iraq, we were shooting the biggest charge that we had available to shoot with our howitzers. It was the Super 8 stick propellant, a fiberglass encased powder that had a complete humongous bang to it. And once you shot this thing, the howitzer jumped back and then it dug itself in. So it's a beast. It's a freaking beast when you shoot this thing. So once you shot it, the howitzer dug in and it wasn't going anywhere anymore. And that caused a problem. One, because whenever we had to move, now here we are, we have to go ahead and dig out those spades to get the howitzer moved and attached back to the truck. So that was a pain to get all that stuff dug in because that ground wasn't soft. It was freaking hard. It was like clay. It was clay, hard dirt. So it was difficult to dig that stuff out. But not only that, whenever we shot these Super 8 stick propellant charges, the concussion was so bad that whenever we shot it, all the 7-ton vehicles that we had with us shattered the windshield completely. The very first round that we shot shattered the windshield. So here we are now, we had no windshield in any of the vehicles. So all the dirt was getting inside. It was getting everything disgusting and dirty. Not that that really mattered because those 7 tons that we had back there in 2003, they didn't have any armor on the outside. These were just regular vehicles that we had. So our solution to that, is that we had trained for before, was that we lined the inside with sandbags, 2 layers on the bottom and 2 layers on each side of the vehicle to allow them to get more protection to the Marines that were in the back, and not to mention the combat load of ammunition that we had to carry in the back to ensure that we had ammunition all the time with us in the event that we had to stop right away as we were moving and conduct any supporting fire missions as we moved down the road. So you guys can just imagine if those vehicles were hit by an RPG or anything like that, those vehicles were going to go up because those sandbags really weren't going to do anything. They were just kind of mostly there for our moral support to ourselves to think that these sandbags were actually going to do something. They might have stopped a round coming in, a couple of rounds from their AK-47s or stuff like that. But we were lucky in the fact that these soldiers from the Iraqi army were basically just throwing the weapons on the grounds and running away. So that kind of made it better for us to ensure that we were not going to be in that kind of a predicament to be put in a situation where the Marines in the back were going to have their life in danger constantly. So it made it a little bit better. But still, it didn't take away from the fact that here we are, thinking about the things that can possibly happen or can happen whenever you're getting shot at or an RPG goes to one of the vehicles, because artillery, what we were shooting, was the main weapon that we used during that initial push in Iraq in 2003. We steel rain on the enemy like it was crazy, like it was no tomorrow. We were constantly shooting fire missions. And, a lot of people still have videos posted on YouTube and stuff like that that allows people would actually see the rounds going down range from a whole entire regiment of artillery shooting into Baghdad. You will see the little rocket propelled ammunition rounds that we shot, that we shoot them down there, and then the little rocket ignites and you'll see the rockets flying in the air. It almost looked, if you can picture Star Wars when they're shooting those little lasers in the air and you see all those lights going through the sky. That's exactly what it was like. And you can hear the rocket once it ignited, and you could hear it shoot and travel all that distance that it went all the way down there. Because with that kind of projectile and that rocket assisted projectile, it allowed those rounds to actually travel 18 to 20 clicks away from us. That's a long ways. That's a long ways away of us shooting ammunition down there and engaging those enemies that were way down in front of us to ensure that our troops on the ground were supported. Now, another reason that we were the main effort was because with the air being so bad, the wind blowing, the sandstorm, the rain, it grounded all of the aircraft. No support aircraft could fly because they could not fly in that kind of weather. So that left artillery as the main support for the infantry on the ground because we were still able to shoot. Artillery still fires in any kind of climate, any kind of weather, it doesn't matter. We continue to support no matter what. And that's a good thing because we're able to provide that good support. But then again, remember, we're outside. We're not covered by any kind of protective equipment or anything like that. We're just outside. I mean, we have a camouflage net that we put on top of us to kind of protect us from air. But since the Iraqi army during that time didn't have any air superiority, all their aircraft were destroyed, we never set up our actual camouflage netting on top of us. And that was a good thing because we were moving so fast and constantly displacing and emplacing in new positions that this would have just took us so much longer to put the net up, take it down, hook up the howitzer, and leave. So that was a plus for us that we didn't have to worry about that. But after those 3 days, once this whole storm pushed through on the 25th of March when it started, man, we actually realized and were able to see how much dirt, how much rain had fallen. Because, I mean, our vehicles were getting stuck because they were sinking into that mud, into that clay that was made because of those storms. And, during that time, we captured POWs that were lost, that we were able to catch from our defensive positions as they were wandering throughout the desert, throughout the roads of the cities and stuff like that. So we were able to capture them and then turn them over to the units that were coming in behind us that were handling any POWs or anything that were captured by the units as we moved forward. So that made for an interesting time. And I just wanted to share that with you guys because, man, that was 20 years ago. 20 years ago that we were there on March 25th of 2003. So it's a day that I'm not going to forget. And I'm sure that a lot of people that were there with me, you're not going to forget, especially those two Marines in our unit that their birthday was on that day. So we really celebrated a nasty birthday with them. But I do remember that on that day, we had our MREs, our meals ready to eat. And in those packs came little pound cakes that came in the MREs. So what we did was we collected all the pound cakes from our section, from our 14 Marines that we had on the gun section, and we made a little birthday cake for them with those pound cakes, the peanut butter that we had that came in the MREs, and we used the Skittles to write happy birthday. So I'm sure that, that's a memorable day that we're going to remember, that we were able to share that day with these Marines, even though it wasn't the birthday that we expected to have, but it allowed us to be able to actually share this birthday with them. And I remember that because when we were in Kuwait, it was my birthday during that time, and the Marines did the exact same thing. Except that time we were still on Camp Matilda, and we were going to the chow hall that they had put into place there. So we were able to get some, a little bread or cakes, and those little cakes that come in a pan that we were able to get. And one of the Marines was able to get one from the chow hall. And that was my birthday cake. But we wanted to make sure that these Marines had something because we were a family. We were there together to ensure that they celebrated that day the best that they could. Are you looking for a photographer who can capture the most important moments in your life? Look no further than Miguel Saenz Photography. Miguel Saenz is an award-winning photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty and emotions of weddings, family portraits, and special events. With years of experience and a creative eye, Miguel Saenz will create stunning images that you'll treasure for years to come. Whether you're looking for a traditional wedding album, a unique family portrait, or a professional headshot for your business, Miguel Saenz Photography has the expertise to bring your vision to life. From the initial consultation to the final product, Miguel Saenz will work with you every step of the way to ensure that your images reflect your unique style and personality. Don't settle for mediocre photographs that simply document an event. Trust Miguel Saenz Photography to create timeless images that capture the essence of your special moments. Book your session today and experience the magic of Miguel Saenz Photography. Visit Miguel Saenz Photography online at miguelsciencephotography.com to see examples of his work and schedule your appointment today.
What we're gonna do right here is go back. Way back into time.
Last week in our reading of our book with the 1st Marine Division in 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we talked about how the division was taking a look at the choke point that was going to be down there on the bridge of Highway 1 and how their plans were going to be to actually be able to utilize other ways of crossing the Euphrates River in order to get them from Highway 1 directly into Highway 7. This week, it's another operational planning update on what they're planning. But this is about the envelopment of Baghdad and the outer cordon that was out there available for the division to actually be able to utilize in their mission in order to complete everything completely from heading into Kuwait and actually heading all the way down to Baghdad, which was overall, that was the ultimate goal, to get into the capital of Iraq to ensure that all the military forces of Saddam Hussein's regime were put at bay, to make sure that they were taken down, to allow the division to head in there into Baghdad and start working to be able to get them people finally liberated from that regime and allowing them to actually get their own government put into place. Now, this was everything that's occurring during that time. Now, obviously, in today's current events that we have learned, things that have occurred and everything, things are different, completely different. But right now, we're taking a look at what the division went through, what they did in order for them to be successful in not only in the planning process, but the actual execution of the mission that they were going to be tasked with to ensure that this mission was going to be successful. So let's take a look at some of the things that happened in February with the division that kind of almost put a twist to their plan, we could say. We can say looking at it that way. But back in late February, the division was asked to consider a different role in the Baghdad fight. In this scenario, the division was to participate in the establishment of an outer cordon around Baghdad instead of a direct assault to secure the city. By the proposed plan, forces from an outer cordon would contain regime forces within and conduct lightning strikes into the urban area. The fight for Baghdad would still belong to the 5 Corps, but the division would isolate the city from the east and the north. This would prevent interference with U.S. actions in Baghdad by Iraqi elements outside of the city, and deny the enemy the ability to withdraw from Baghdad to make another last-ditch stand at Tikrit. Now, Tikrit was the actual place where Saddam Hussein was from, and that is where our units, our batteries, our battalion moved all the way up into Tikrit. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. This scheme ran counter to the Blue Diamond operational vision for the Baghdad fight, which was to continue the attack in the unrelenting series of sustained attacks, rather than a series of raids. Raiding from the returning to a cordon outside the urban area might encourage the enemy by allowing him to remain in control of the field of battle and the end of the action, forcing U.S. forces to repeatedly re-attack over the same ground. Regardless, of the urban strategy eventually pursued, plans were made for the initial cordon around the city. Key to establishing this outer cordon was the division's ability to bypass Baghdad to the east. Weeks prior, the division had requested an additional MCIA study of routes from Al-Qut to Baghdad. Termed the Hook 2 study, the routes presented offered some limited opportunities to envelop Baghdad to the east. The planners decided to recommend that one RCT cross over the Dilania River north of the city to put the blocking positions on both Highway 2 and Highway 5, the principal escape routes from Baghdad. Another RCT, attacking along the Highway 6 avenue of approach, would provide uninterrupted pressure on the Baghdad defenses from the south, setting the conditions from the 3rd RCT to attack into the urban area using friendly corridors along Saddam City. The division continued to develop this preliminary plan, but waited for higher headquarters to define what role Blue Diamond would have in the Baghdad fight. Now, even with all the planning, everything they already had into place, as we can see, and I want you guys to remember to understand that plans are just that, plans. Things change. And you can imagine in the battlefield, when you're out there in combat, things change constantly. Now, all of you that have been in the military, were in the war on terror, participated in fights in Iraq and in Afghanistan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But especially to the troops on the ground, all these changes and plans is another reason why it's very, very important that everybody is aware of the plan, to have situational awareness. From the highest ranking person in a unit all the way down to that lonely young private PFC, they must understand the plan and what the mission is, so that way they are mentally prepared to ensure that they're going to be successful in everything that needs to get done. And even till this day, that is very, very important to me, because if everybody doesn't know the plan or what the mission actually is, if something happens to somebody else that's in charge or that it's higher position than you are you going to be prepared to step up and actually complete the mission if that individual is no longer there? And that is why, to me, it is very important. And the whole time that I was still on active duty, it was very, very important that everybody in the battery was trained on other people's jobs. Because you never know when you're going to have to actually step up and do another job of the unit. Now, in an artillery battery, we have different sections. Of course, you have the gun line. Those Marines, the cannoneers, that are in charge of actually firing the artillery pieces, loading them, putting the right deflection, the quadrant, the amount of charge, everything that needs to be put into the howitzer. So basically, they're the actual hard labor. They're the ones that are out there in the dirt, getting things done, making sure that the guns are in the right position, getting in there and moving all the heavy load of equipment and all that stuff in the battery. And then we have the Fire Direction Control Center. Yes, we used to make fun of them all the time because they're sitting there inside of a tent, air conditioning in there whenever we're in hot environments, because they had the computers, the AFATIDs, wherever they received all the calculations of the fire emissions. That's how they determined the actual deflection, the quadrants. But I also ensured that those individuals that we pulled, maybe 3 or 4 at a time, send them back to the gun line to actually work on the gun line. And then in turn, we send 3 or 4 Marines from the gun line to the FDC to work in the Fire Direction Control Center. So that way they would learn exactly what they did. And they were capable of stepping in and helping to get everything that they needed to have done to ensure that we accomplish the mission. Because you never know. You never know when something can happen. We're firing explosives that are being shot from a cannon. An explosion is being caused inside of the chamber of this weapon system that pushes this ammo and the warhead down range. Can things happen? Yes, of course. There's faulty ammunition. There's faulty powder. Something can happen in any of the events or processes that happen of the ignition of the primer the explosion of the powder, and the round being sent out of the tube downrange to where it needs to go. Things can happen. There could be microscopic little cracks in the tube or something that maybe they weren't caught. And an explosion can occur, and an inboard explosion can happen. The Iraqi forces had artillery pieces of their own. So we were prepared with counter battery radar to ensure that we can support ourselves and fire counter battery fire on any other artillery pieces or any mortar systems that maybe were out there that were trying to engage us as we were engaging them. You know, and that's something that a lot of people, I guess if you're not really there on the ground, you're not really going to understand what goes through the minds of these Marines that are there on the ground. Now, when I was there, you know, I was a sergeant when we were deployed to Iraq during this time frame in 2003, when we headed into Kuwait in preparation for our mission, heading into Iraq, and eventually down to the actual capital city of Baghdad, and further in our push all the way up to Tikrit. It was a big, huge learning curve. I can't even tell you that because nobody in the battery, except two of the master gunnery sergeants that we had in our unit, actually had combat experience. They were the only ones. So here we are. Everybody never had any kind of combat experience. And they were trying to explain to us, you know, some of the things that could happen, some of the things that might happen, you know, heading across the border and actually heading out there and doing what we were actually trained to do. Because we trained for years and years and years to prepare ourselves to actually go out there and do what we needed to do. And like I told all the Marines under my charge, it's either us or it's them. We have to ensure that we do our job to the best of our ability so we can ensure that we all make it home safely and return back to our families. Hero Highlight. This week in our Hero Highlights, we take a look at the citation of Captain Richard E. Fleming, United States Marine Corps. Richard E. Fleming was born in St. Paul, Minnesota on 2 November 1917. He attended St. Thomas Military Academy and graduated in the class of 1935. During his senior year, he was chosen as top student officer. From St. Thomas, he entered the University of Minnesota and became president of Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in 1939. Soon after graduation, he enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve and applied for flight training. He was sent to Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida, for training and finished at the top of his class in 1940. He was promoted to first lieutenant in April 1942 and to captain a month later. Captain Fleming's first duty station was at Naval Air Base San Diego, California. 10 days after the war began, he flew from Pearl Harbor to Midway Island. Captain Fleming, flight officer of Marine Scout Bombing Squadron 241, established himself as one of the greatest heroes of World War II in the Battle of Midway. When his squadron commander was shot down during the initial attack on a Japanese aircraft carrier, Captain Fleming took command of the division. Leaving the remainder of his formation, he divided to precisely low altitude of 400 feet, exposing himself to enemy fire in order to score a hit on the ship. The following day, 5 June 1942, Captain Fleming led the 2nd Division of his squadron in a mass dive bombing assault on the enemy battleship. Putting his plane into an approach glide, he again dived low and succeeded in scoring a near miss on the objective. His plane, hit by anti-aircraft, caught fire. Unable to pull out of his dive, Captain Fleming, his ship a mass of flames, crashed into the sea. For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty, Captain Fleming was posthumously awarded the nation's highest military honor decoration, the Medal of Honor. On 24 November 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt presented the Medal of Honor to Captain Fleming's mother. Next week in our Hero Highlight, we will take a look at the story of Captain Joseph Jacob Foss. The Quarterdeck. Now that we're on the verge of actually ending the month of March, we're moving along swiftly in our reading of our book with the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, and we talked about how the division was enveloping a plan to use the outer cordon of Baghdad. Now that, they were giving it a little bit of a twist and allowing them to actually be a different part of the actual assault going into Baghdad, way different from the initial plan that they actually, started out with, what the plan was for the division to actually head out and be able to actually conduct. So it's a twist in our story, but our book is moving along. And as we move along, we're going to continue to get more and more into detail on exactly what's going on, what occurred with the division during that time frame. And of course, like always, I'm going to make sure that I give you guys my point of view from my understanding of what it was like being on the ground during that time. Actually being down there with 5th Battalion, 11th Marines, conducting the mission. But now, as we learn in the actual planning process and what the division was going through, now it's more clear. It's more of a better understanding of what exactly happened. In our Hero Highlight, we talked about Captain Richard Eugene Fleming, another Marine, a pilot, things that he did in order to ensure that the success of the mission during that time, during World War II. Outstanding Marine, and the things that he did, the sacrifice that he made for our country, will never be forgotten. Next week, we take a look at Captain Joseph Jacob Foss, and we look at his story and what he did in order to earn himself that Congressional Medal of Honor. I want to take the opportunity again this week to welcome all our new listeners that are joining us here for the very first time here on the Quarterdeck. And thank you guys for finding us, or whoever told you guys about our podcast. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. And just a reminder to everybody that you're able to actually find our podcast just by simply doing a Google search on your search engine. Wherever you are, you can just simply search for the Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs, and it will give you all the different media sources, all the podcast players that are out there that will allow you to actually listen to our episodes. And let's not forget to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, to our podcast, to ensure that you are aware of when a new episode is posted. Now, just a reminder that our episodes are always posted every Thursday at 08:11. It's posted during that time to ensure that you are kept in the loop on what is going on with our reading of our book and anything that may be current or current events that may be going on, or just simply just shooting the shit here with Gunny and learning a little bit more about the things that I did as a Marine, as a young, not so smart Marine, and so forth. And I get the opportunity to share the stories that you guys share with me on our Facebook page, the Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs. A reminder to you that you are more than welcome to go onto our Facebook page. Leave us comments, leave us questions, things that we can discuss here on the podcast on a weekly basis. And again, if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast and just sharing your stories about the Marine Corps or some of the things that you went through, all the way from recruit training, all the way until the time you got out of the service, please send us a message there on our Facebook page, the Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible to be able to actually set up a date, a time for us to actually have an interview recorded down there and included into our podcast. That way, make sure we have it there and the people get an actual opportunity to listen to the stories of other Marines and what they went through in their time in the Marine Corps. With that being said, I hope that everybody has a wonderful Thursday. Remember, clean those nasty rooms. Get them clean. It is Thursday. It is field day. And we want to make sure that you have the things done so you have a great weekend this morning. You can enjoy it with the family and do whatever you got to do and not have to worry about your room, your house being a mess and have that stress on your mind the whole entire weekend. So until next week, this is Miguel, the Gunny Signs, sounding Liberty Call.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.